Good evening. This is an extraordinary moment in the life of this Parliament and in the actions of this government. The Home Secretary has bowed to a prevailing mood in the country in the wake of cases such as Jimmy Savile and Rolf Harris, and the dogged determination of a backbench Tory MP to announce, against expectation, an independent inquiry into the handling of allegations of historic child abuse, as well as a review of how public institutions deal with the issues of child protection. The Prime Minister has promised they will leave no stone unturned. Here's Katie Razzle.
Parliament needed cleaning up in 1983 and some of the workmen went at it with gusto. But was there a much more serious clean-up needed? Were some of the most powerful people in the country engaged in child abuse, as has been suggested? A BBC documentary broadcast a decade later included an interview with a Conservative whip describing reasons why MPs might ask the whip's office for help.
Anyone with any sense who was in trouble would come to the whips and tell them the truth. They'd say, no, I'm in a jam, can you help? It might be debt, it might be scandal involving small boys, or any kind of scandal.
I believe the measures I've announced...
The government has previously ruled out holding a far-reaching inquiry into allegations of child abuse. Today, the Home Secretary announced two.
Our priority must be the prosecution of the people behind these disgusting crimes. That wherever possible and consistent with the need to prosecute, we will adopt a presumption of maximum transparency. And that where there has been a failure to protect children from abuse, we will expose it and we will learn from it.
The first inquiry concerns the dossier written by this man, the now dead MP Geoffrey Dickens, which he handed to the Home Office and the then Home Secretary Lord Britton. It apparently detailed the activities of a Westminster paedophile ring and has been lost or destroyed, along with 113 other potentially relevant documents.
I felt it should be a country where children could play happily.
Mr Dickens campaigned on paedophilia and regularly used parliamentary privilege to make accusations. Newsnight has spoken to one person named by Dickens and wrongly smeared in the 1980s. He says it ruined his life.
Put it before Parliament that we castrate the buggers.
So what do we know about the man behind the dossier?
Geoffrey Dickens was a serious man, but until I actually mentioned the word paedophile to him, he had never heard of it. And when I told him what was alleged to be going on, he took it up with great gusto and started creating these dossiers in which there's been so much trouble and speculation.
Might I ask you, Rolf?
Why has all this bubbled up now? Well, the spiralling revelations about child abuse by the likes of Jimmy Savile and Rolf Harris reached fever pitch with allegations about what Leon Britton did with the dossier. He said today any suggestions he failed to deal adequately with it are completely without foundation, but names of alleged abusers have been swirling.
People need to be careful if we want to protect the victims and let them see justice. We must follow a process which I appreciate is annoying if you've got something that you know is exciting and interesting and indeed very important, and you want to get it out there and make sure that something's done about it. But sometimes just being a little calm about these things can get a better result in the long run than rushing off and saying things in public early on.
Among the inquiries into historical paedophilia already, Jimmy Savile's abuse at the BBC, following the revelations from the NHS last month. The Metropolitan Police's post-Savile Operation Yewtree has brought prosecutions. Operation Fernbridge is examining accusations of historical sexual abuse of children at the former Elm Guesthouse in Barnes, London. North Wales Police have asked for a review on alleged historical abuse in care homes. Police in Manchester are starting a criminal inquiry into alleged paedophile abuse at a residential school in Rochdale in the 80s and 90s.
Allegations that evidence of the sexual abuse of children was suppressed by people in positions of power.
It can sometimes feel like another day, another abuse scandal. Today, Theresa May announced a Hillsborough-style independent inquiry investigating how public bodies from the police to social services to schools handled child sex abuse allegations. So why has the Home Secretary changed her mind and added two new inquiries into the already burgeoning numbers of investigations into child sex abuse in Britain? And what can these new ones achieve?
I think it's where we need to be so that we can move on from it, so that we can get answers to what went wrong, we can establish who were part of the cover-up, and we can also identify some of the perpetrators that are still walking our streets.
Do you want a man to represent you, or do you want a party robot?
Mr Danchuk revealed the late MP Cyril Smith's alleged child abuse and believes the public demands answers on paedophilia. But has the government been pushed into taking action?
We feel as if there's not an inquisition into something, then the politicians aren't doing their job properly. I think there's a real danger that we do get carried away here, and I think the politicians back there are getting too carried away. I doubt, after a few weeks' reflection, if they would behave the way that they're behaving now.
Back then it took several years to clean the buildings of Westminster. Cleaning up what may have gone on there is still ongoing.
Katie Razawal in our Oxford studio now is Peter McKelvey, the former Child Protection Manager, who was the first to raise concerns that high-ranking politicians were involved in child abuse. He hasn't spoken publicly about this for 20 years. Peter McKelvey, first of all, what's your reaction to the news that there's going to be both an inquiry and a review today?
Good evening. Well, I think it's a very positive step forward, but I wouldn't want people to think that that is the end of the story. It's just the beginning of a process that needs to start now.
And what about the nature of this inquiry, the people who are going to lead it?
I think it's absolutely crucial that survivors have the biggest say in who should be in an inquiry, because survivors will only come forward if it's people that they can trust and people who haven't let them down in the past. And when I say people, I mean institutions that perhaps survivors have tried to talk to in the past, but they either haven't been believed or their stories have been seen as not credible because of the sort of size of the allegations that they're making and the seriousness of them. So,
in relation to the NSPCC, have you got concerns?
From a number of survivors I've spoken to, and also from a number of witnesses, the concerns that they have about the NSPCC is that it's very much the charity of the establishment, and has for many, many years obviously had people like Rolf Harris and Jimmy Savile associated with the fundraising side of it.
Well, what are the claims that you're actually making in relation to historic child abuse centred around Westminster?
Well, obviously I'm not going to say on live television any details that might interfere with any current police investigations, but for the last 30 years and longer than that, there have been a number of allegations made by survivors that people at the very top of powerful institutions in this country, which include politicians, judges, senior military figures, and even people who have links with the royal family, have been involved in the abuse of children.
So what was actually happening? Can you give us some idea of the seriousness of these allegations?
At the most serious level, we're talking about brutal rape of quite young boys.
And did you take your concerns to politicians, say, 20 years ago?
Well, after an investigation that I was involved in was closed down before it had even got off the ground, a senior police officer from the Metropolitan Police and two very experienced investigative journalists and myself had a meeting with a very prominent figure in the opposition party at the time, the Labour Party
obviously.
At that time, and we essentially gave the details that we want to give now, but nothing came of it.
You seem to be suggesting that, as far as Westminster is concerned, that paedophilia was used as a kind of, to create a kind of indebtedness, that actually it was used as a weapon.
Well, that's the impression you would have from the statement by Tim Fortescue and many others.
Yes, he was the late.
Yes, sorry. What I'm saying is that paedophiles infiltrate every institution, but the more powerful the institution is, the more powerful the abusers are. And unfortunately, Parliament, politicians haven't been immune from the infiltration by paedophiles.
Now, and you've absolutely said, and you can't name any names, but a number of the people that you're alleging, that your survivors are alleging, where the perpetrators are dead, but are you suggesting that there are still people in power, positions of power, who were involved 20-odd years ago?
Very much so, yes. But what I must emphasise is this is what survivors are saying, and the problem up until now is that it has never been tested. There hasn't been the opportunity for survivors to be listened to, and so what are allegations may or may not be true, but the allegations are there, and the allegations are against very specific named individuals. And the initial impression that I would have is that there's a great deal of truth in them, and they need to be investigated in great detail.
Now, Peter McKelvey, please stay with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So questions both at the heart of these investigations are huge, whether some senior politicians in the 1980s may turn out to be paedophiles, and also whether public institutions in which we trust may have allowed children to be abused. But is this a proportionate response, or are we in danger of being swept along in a tide of moral panic? In the studio, we have the author and sociologist Frank Furedi, and the Telegraph journalist and head of the Legatum Institute think tank, Christina O'Doney, and as I say, Peter is still with us. First of all, Frank Furedi, do you think this investigation and indeed the review has come at the right time?
Well, it seems to me that we're so addicted to inquiries and investigations that it's acquired a ritualistic, almost pointless character. We're always told this investigation, this inquiry will put things right, it will bring closure. But you'll find that for a long time now, we have this continuous obsessive desire to ruminate with the past. And it's almost acquired a psychological displacement activity where we're simply losing sort of sight of the fact that there are problems we could be dealing with in the here and now.
But some people can't get on with their lives in the here and now, as we know from the Savile case and the Rolf Harris case, until these things are dealt with properly.
Well, the unfortunate thing is that experience shows is that these ritualistic sort of performances do not bring closure, but they merely incite more denunciations. They merely lead to more people being sort of becoming the target of investigations.
Frank,
and
I
complete proliferation of investigations going on.
Frank, obviously it would be awful if anybody who is innocent were accused of anything as nefarious and vicious and horrible as child abuse. But for Pete's sake, Frank, if you were a parent of one of these children, would you not wish for a thorough investigation, for a public investigation to take place?
Well, it seems to me that the idea of investigating these historic wrongs, and I'm sure there are a lot of wrongs and injustices were done, retrospectively invites as many confusions as solutions. And in a different climate, if you had the odd individuals being investigated, that could work.
But surely it's actually preferable to have these things investigated and indeed then discounted than not to have them investigated at all.
At all, exactly. To have a cover-up, a culture of secrecy.
You've got to remember that we weren't going to have this investigation even last week. Do you think there's a danger here that what the government is doing is kind of responding to a kind of rising hysteria?
I don't think it's a rising hysteria. I think it is a rising anger, and for once I think moral indignation and moral outrage are exactly the mood of the people and the mood that we should espouse.
But then that moral indignation leads to mistakes. I mean, leads
Not
to
always.
people being beaten up who are innocent.
I agree that it would be awful if one innocent person were beaten up. But Frank,
the people on the streets
we
of England,
want justice, and I think
people are not demanding these things. These things come from a very small section of society.
No, I don't believe that.
Well, I mean, if you talk to normal human beings, they don't get up in the morning and they say, "Oh my God, we need to have yet another inquiry, yet another judicial inquest."
I think
that's not what people are worried about.
Is there a danger that it will lead to witch hunts? If you think of Bijam Imrahani, who was burnt to death in Bristol, wrongly accused, the danger is that you have a mood which then turns into a kind of lynch mob, a witch hunt.
Kirsty, you know what? My church, the Catholic Church, only recently was investigated in this way. And they had to turn themselves inside out. And people said, and Catholics said, is this a witch hunt?
But that is different. Is different. The way that it's been found out and dealt with in the Catholic Church was quite specific. We don't have, and we don't have names, we don't have anything, I assume, approaching that kind of scale at Westminster.
But we're beginning to see a culture of secrecy, a culture of cover-up at Westminster, as there was within the Catholic Church. And I think that the same impulses of we're in power, we can abuse the most vulnerable among you.
But
let me ask Peter Mackenzie that, as again, without naming any names, is what Christina O'Doney is saying right, that there is a culture of those in power think they can do anything with impunity? Do you think that was the atmosphere as described to you by some of the survivors?
That's my experience and my view, yes. And I must say I find it quite disappointing that after all these years that the views of Mr. Furedi has still been put across in a programme like this, when all we're asking for is to look at the evidence, to listen to survivors, and to discount rumours, false allegations, and just concentrate on very clear, solid allegations, and once and for all allow the opportunity for survivors to talk about their abuse in a very calm manner to very trusted people.
Frank Faridi, do you have any concerns, I mean, interested from both sides on this, about creating a kind of an atmosphere where children think of, particularly of men, as sexual predators?
Well, I think we already have that. If you look at the way that generational relations are managed in our society, adults, and not just men but also women, have become physically and psychically distant from children. We now have a situation where children are warned about the danger of strangers to the point at which the spontaneity and informality of everyday society has, is no longer exist. And I do worry about the deformations this causes children who
that's a difficult thing to counter now, Christina Donny, if this is the atmosphere.
And I think it is a very high price for us to pay. But when you look at the Rolf Harris and the Jimmy Savile images and you think stranger danger might have been a good lesson for those children to have learned.
I would rather my children went out on the street, had a bit of freedom, learned about independence.
And were pawed by a Rolf Harris? Come on.
We can make them aware of all the risk. We don't have to have a no-go area for children.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. Peter McKelvey, thank you very much indeed.